The great hall of Wexcombe Court had not been so full since the old Earl's funeral, and every face in it had turned toward the woman at the threshold who did not belong. She wore a grey travelling gown gone soft at the cuffs, gloves mended once at the seam, and a bonnet that had seen 3 winters and meant to see a 4th. Snow still clung to the hem where the carriage had set her down in the cold. The footman had not announced her, because no one had known what to call her. She stood with her hands folded and her chin level, and she said, into the silence of 40 assembled relations and their solicitors, that she was the Countess of Wexcombe, and that she had come to take what was hers. Lady Marguerite Vane, the dowager who had ruled that hall for 30 years, laughed first. It was a small laugh, polished and dry, the kind that gives permission to a room, and the room took it. The laughter ran down the long table and broke against the far wall and came back. A woman in claiming a title in that gown, with that bonnet. They laughed because it was easier than the alternative, and the alternative had only just walked through the door. You have perhaps seen a person stand very still while a room decides what she is. Stay with this one. She knew something the room did not, and she had carried the proof of it 160 miles in a wooden box she would not let the footman take. Her name was Eleanor Hartley, and 6 weeks earlier she had been a governess in a house in Yorkshire, teaching 2 small girls their letters and their scales for £30 a year, and her keep. She had not known she was a countess. She had not known she was anything but Miss Hartley, who was good with children and quiet at dinner, and not to be seated near the unmarried gentleman. The letter that changed it had come on a Tuesday, carried by a solicitor who had spent 11 months and a great deal of his own reputation finding her, and she had read it standing in the cold passage outside the nursery because her hands would not let her sit. The estate of Wexcombe had fallen, on the death of the 7th Earl, into what the lawyers called abeyance and the family called opportunity. There was no son. There was a younger brother, Mr. Ree. Crispin Vane, who expected the whole of it, and a dowager aunt, Lady Marguerite, who intended to see that he had it, and between them they had arranged the matter as one arranges furniture, with confidence and without consultation. What none of them had expected was a marriage 30 years buried. The 7th Earl had married in his reckless youth and against his family's violent objection a parson's daughter named Catherine, and the family had paid Catherine to disappear and called the marriage a mistake that had never been. Catherine had not disappeared. She had gone to Yorkshire, borne a daughter and raised her under her own maiden name so that no one would come for the child. Catherine was Eleanor's mother. Eleanor was the legitimate issue of a legitimate marriage, and the title of Wexcombe, by every law of the realm, did not pass to Crispin at all. That was the thing the room did not know, standing there in its silk and its certainty, laughing at a woman in a mended glove. The man who did not laugh stood at the cold end of the hall, near the tall windows, with his back half to the company and a glass of untouched wine in his hand. He was the only person present who was not a Vane and not a servant, and the family suffered his presence because they needed him. Adrian Thorne, the Marquess of Aldous, held the mortgages on half the Wexcombe land. He had come to see his security settled, and he watched the woman at the door. With the attention a man gives to a thing that does not fit the room it is in, he did not laugh. He set the glass down on the sill. He was 36 years old, tall and built like a man who had once done his own labor, with dark hair going iron at the temples and a jaw that did not move when the rest of the room was moving. His eyes were a gray so dark they read as charcoal in that light, and they did not leave her. Lady Marguerite recovered first, as she always did. She rose, and the rising silenced the laugh she had begun. She crossed half the distance to the door and stopped at a measured remove, the remove a great lady keeps between herself and a tradesman. She looked Eleanor over from bonnet to hem, and what she said sweetly, so that it would carry the poor creature, she said, to the cousin nearest her, but loud enough for the table. The poor deluded creature. She has come a very long way to embarrass herself. Eleanor heard it. Her face did not change. Her hand at her side closed once around the strap of the box she carried, and the leather creaked, and she did not let go. She had been warned this would happen. The solicitor, Mr. Mr. Bramwell had told her on the long road south that they would laugh, that they would call her mad or grasping or both, that a claim of this kind was won not in a single afternoon, but across months of examined documents and sworn testimony and the slow grinding of the ecclesiastical courts. He had told her to expect nothing on the first day but contempt. She had nodded and said she understood. What she had not told him was that she had not come to be examined. She had come to be seen in the one room where her mother had been erased by the people who had done the erasing. The proof could wait for the courts. The standing could not wait at all. A child watches a room the way a dog watches a table for the moment something falls. There was such a child present that afternoon, a boy of perhaps 7 in a too large coat, the son of one of the cousins, and he had stopped his fidgeting to stare at the woman in gray. He alone in the room seemed to understand that something was happening. Eleanor saw him, and for the space of a breath, her face softened, and she gave him the smallest nod, one person acknowledging another. And the boy sat up straighter, as though he had been knighted. Mr. Prox. Crispin Vane came forward then, because he had decided the dowager's contempt was not enough, and that the matter wanted a man. He was a handsome man of perhaps 30, fair where his aunt was dark, with the easy confidence of someone who had never been refused anything he had truly wanted. He smiled at Eleanor, as one smiles at a tedious tenant. He told her gently that she had been imposed upon, that some scoundrel had filled her head with a story, that there had been many such claimants over the years, and the family had dealt kindly with all of them, and that if she would consent to take some refreshment in the kitchen and then be on her way, no more would be said. He held out his hand toward the door the way a man shows a horse to its stall. Eleanor looked at the hand. Then she looked past it, at the long table, at the portraits on the wall above it, at one portrait in particular, a young man in the dress of 30 years gone, dark-haired, gray-eyed, with a recklessness in his painted face that no amount of family disapproval had ever quite scrubbed out. She had her father's eyes. She had not known it until that moment. Looking up at a man she had never met and seeing her own gaze come back down at her, something moved in her throat. She did not let it reach her face. "I will not take refreshment in the kitchen," she said. Her voice was low and very clear, and it did not shake. "I was born in this family. Whether the family chose to know it or not, I will stand where my mother was forbidden to stand. And then I will go, and I will come back with the law behind me, and you will none of you be laughing." The Marquess of Aldous at the cold end of the hall picked his glass back up. It was the only motion in the room. He did not drink from it. He simply held it and watched her, and the watching had changed. That night, Eleanor lodged at the village inn, the Wexcombe Arms, because no door at the court had opened to her, and she had not asked one to. The room was small and clean and cost more than she could comfortably spare, and she sat on the edge of the narrow bed with a wooden box on her knees and did not open it. She knew what was inside. She did not need to look. A marriage register, the page lifted by the late Earl's own confessor, and kept these 30 years against exactly this hour. A letter in her mother's hand. A miniature, no larger than a crown coin, of a dark-haired man with reckless eyes, painted the year before the family bought his bride away. Her mother had kept the miniature under the floor of the Yorkshire cottage, wrapped in a square of flannel, and had given it to Eleanor on her deathbed with 3 words: "Make them know." That was all. Make them know. She had spent her whole life being unknown. It had seemed, until the letter came, a permanent condition, like the color of her eyes or the cold of a Yorkshire winter. A governess is by design invisible. She is in the room to make the children better, and is not herself to be regarded. Eleanor had grown so accomplished at being unregarded that she had half forgotten there was a person under the gray gown at all. And now her mother's 3 words sat in her chest like a coal. and she found she did not want the title for the title's sake, nor the estate for its rents. She wanted the family who had laughed at her mother's existence to be made to say her mother's name. That was the whole of it. The rest was law. There was a knock at the door of a small room, soft and single, and when she opened it, the Marquis of Aldous was standing in the low passage with his hat in his hand. He had come, he said, on his own account and no one's instruction. He asked whether he might speak with her, and when she hesitated, he added that the door might remain open and the innkeeper's wife was on the stair, and Eleanor understood that he had thought about her position before he came, which no one at the court had done. She let him in. He did not sit. He stood by the window with the same stillness he had worn in the hall, and he told her plainly why he had come. He held, he said, the mortgages on the Wexcombe land. Whoever proved the better claim to the title would inherit those debts along with the acres, and it was therefore his concern, as a matter of business, to know whether her claim was real or whether she was, as the family insisted, a fraud. He had watched a great many people lie in a great many drawing rooms. He had not, he said, seen her lie. He wished to know the truth of it. She might have been insulted. She found that she was not. There was something restful in being asked a direct question by a man who clearly intended to weigh the answer, rather than to dismiss it. So she told him. Not the whole of it, but enough. She told him her mother's name, Catherine, and watched him take it without flinching, the way a man takes a fact he intends to keep. She told him of the marriage in a country church, and the family's fury, and the money pressed on a parson's daughter to make her vanish. She told him of the 30 years of silence, the borrowed maiden name, the small cold cottage in Yorkshire, where the wind came under the door no matter what was stuffed against it. She told him last of the death, and of the 3 words her mother had given her with the miniature, though she did not repeat the words aloud, because they were not yet his to hear. She did not weep telling it, though her voice went rough at the end and she had to stop and press her gloved knuckles once against her mouth and master it. He did not look away while she mastered it, which she was grateful for, because to look away would have been a kindness that named the thing she was hiding, and she did not want it named. He stood very still by the window, the snow-light gray on the hard plains of his face, and he let her finish in her own time, and he did not fill the silences for her. And that, too, was a kind of courtesy she had not been shown in a long while. When she had finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said the first thing he had said that was not a question. They were wrong to laugh, he said. The words were level and carried no flourish. They were wrong to laugh, and they will learn it. He took his leave, and at the door he turned, and he told her that if she meant to fight this through the courts, she would need money she did not have, for the ecclesiastical process was slow and ruinous and built to exhaust exactly the kind of claimant the family could afford to starve. He did not offer her money. He offered her something stranger. He said that he would not call her claim a fraud to the family while it remained unproven, which was the only thing keeping the family confident, and that his silence was worth more to her cause than coin. Then he was gone. And Eleanor sat a long while with the box on her knees and her heart doing a thing it had not done in years. The Marquess of Aldous was not a man the world found easy to read, and the world had stopped trying. He had married 8 years before, a gentle, laughing girl named Sophia, and he had loved her with the whole of a nature that did not know how to do anything by halves, and he had buried her 16 months later, when a fever took her, and the child she carried in the same week. He had not spoken her name aloud since. He had turned her portrait to the wall in his own house and locked the broom and given the key to no one. He had become in the years since a man of business and silences, who lent money and foreclosed without apparent feeling, and was thought by those who did not know him to have no heart left to break. What none of them understood was that a man does not turn a portrait to the wall because he has stopped feeling. He turns it because the feeling is past bearing. Eleanor, telling her story in a small inn-room, mastering her grief in front of him rather than performing it, had done a thing he had not seen done in 8 years. She had shown him exactly what he had spent 8 years hiding. and the thing he kept under his own floor had stirred. The contest did not stay in the inn-room. By the following week it had spread through the county the way such things do, and the family had moved from contempt to alarm, because Mr. Franning Bramwell, the solicitor, had begun lodging documents with the diocesan registry. And documents lodged are documents that may be examined, and examination was the one thing the Vanes could not afford. Lady Marguerite, who had buried this scandal once and meant to bury it again, set about the work with the cold efficiency of a woman who has done it before. She wrote letters. She reminded certain people of certain favors. And she let it be known in the drawing rooms of the county that the woman calling herself the Countess of Wexcombe was a governess of no family who had got hold of some old papers and an inflated notion of herself, and that the kindest word for her was deluded, and the truest word was something worse. The label traveled faster than the truth, as labels do. The deluded governess. Eleanor heard it spoken at the inn, at the church door, in the village shop where she went to buy thread to mend her other glove. The deluded governess. It did not break her. Yet it sat on her, day after day, the way cold sits in old bones, and there were nights she lay in the narrow bed and wondered whether her mother's 3 words had been a gift or a curse, whether make them know had been worth the grey afternoons of being known only as a fraud. The Marquess did not laugh, and the Marquess did not leave. He had taken rooms at the same inn, ostensibly to see his Wexcombe business settled, and he found a great many reasons to be in the public parlor when Eleanor came down. He did not court her. He would not have known how, and she would not have permitted it. What he did was steadier than courtship, and harder to refuse. He noticed things. He noticed that she ate little when her funds ran low, and the next morning the innkeeper's wife brought up a breakfast that had been paid for, and would not say by whom. He noticed that she had no fire late in the afternoon, and that the want of one had reddened her hands at the knuckles, and a basket of coal appeared on the landing with no card. When she confronted him about the coal having guessed, he did not deny it. Eat something, he said, instead of answering, and sit nearer the fire, and let me hear what Bramwell found in the registry. The commands were not gentle. They were the only language he had for tenderness, and she was beginning, against her own better sense, to hear what was inside them. There came an afternoon in the 2nd week when the rain drove them both into the inn's small library, a damp room of perhaps 200 books that no one used, the leather spines gone soft with the weather, and the single window running with water. Eleanor had gone there to be alone with Bramwell's latest letter, and the Marquess had followed the sound of the rain, and found her there, and neither of them left. They spoke for 2 hours. She told him about the Yorkshire girls she had taught, the elder of whom, a child of 9 named Beatrice, had a gift for the pianoforte that her parents could not be made to value, treating the lessons as an ornament to be acquired cheaply rather than a fire to be fed. She told him how she had stayed up past midnight more than once, copying out music for the child by candlelight with cold fingers, because no one else in that house would trouble to do it, and the child deserved to have the notes she could not afford to buy. He listened with the whole of his attention. What she was finding was a thing he did rarely and completely. He told her, before he had decided to, that his wife had played. The word came out of him quietly, and the room went very still around the admission. He had not meant to say it. The word wife sat in the air between them, the first time he had spoken it in 8 years, and his hand had closed on the back of the chair beside him, as though to steady himself against the sound of it. Eleanor did not seize on it, or soften toward it, or do any of the things that would have made him regret it. She only said quietly that she was sorry, and that music in a house was a thing you did not know you had loved until the house went silent. He looked at her across the small damp room then, and something behind his eyes shifted, like a weight settling, and she felt the 8 years locked door move on its hinge between them. He stood. He crossed to where she sat, 3 slow steps over the worn boards, and the letter lay forgotten in her lap. He did not touch her. He stopped a single pace away, close enough that she had to tip her head to keep his eyes, close enough that she could see the rain-caught silver in his dark hair and the iron at his temples and the small muscle that moved once in his jaw and then went still. The rain was loud on the one window. For a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. Her breath had gone shallow and would not deepen. She was aware of exactly where he stood without looking, aware of the warmth of him in the cold room, aware of a scent of rain and wool and something warmer beneath it, aware that her own hand had risen halfway from her lap and that she did not know what it meant to do or where it meant to go. Her heart was loud in her own ears, louder than the rain, and she understood with a sudden frightening clarity that she wanted, simply and entirely, to close the single pace between them, that she had wanted it for days and had been calling the want by other names. He looked at the rising hand. He looked at her face, at her mouth, at the color climbing her throat. And then, very deliberately, as a man sets down something he is afraid of dropping, he stepped back, and the cold rushed into the space where the warmth had been, and he said, in a voice gone low and not quite level, that she should not be alone with him, that her claim could not afford the breath of scandal, that he would not be the thing the family used against her. He left her in the library with the rain. She sat a long time and did not read the letter. Her hand, when she finally looked at it, was still half raised, and she lowered it slowly and pressed it flat against her knee, and was a long while steadying her breath back to its ordinary rhythm. What she had not let herself understand until that afternoon and could no longer pretend away was that she had stopped fighting only for her mother. She was fighting now for a future she had never permitted herself to imagine, a future with a fire in it and music in it, and a man who said, "Eat something," and meant, "I cannot bear to watch you go without." It frightened her more than the family did. The family could only take what she had never had. This could take something she had only just dared to want. The blow, when it came as such blows do, from the direction she had stopped watching. Lady Marguerite had not been idle. She had found, or made, a witness. A clergyman of failing memory and reliable poverty. Pelham, who had once held a living in the dowager's gift and had lost it to drink and debt, was produced and prevailed upon to swear that the marriage register Eleanor relied upon was a forgery, that he had been present at no such ceremony, that the page had been inserted into the parish book years after the fact by a hand other than the true incumbent's. It was a lie and a clumsy one, and it would not stand a year of honest examination. It was, however, a sworn lie, lodged with the registry under a clergyman's name, and a sworn lie is a thing the courts must weigh, and the weighing would take months, and months were exactly the weapon the family had, and Eleanor had not. The dowager understood the arithmetic perfectly. She did not need to win the case. She needed only to make it long and to make it public, and to let the county's memory do the rest. Worse, she arranged for the accusation to be made, not in a quiet chamber, but at the worst possible moment, and in the worst possible place. At the county assembly ball, the one gathering of the season where every family of consequence in 3 counties would be present, the same hierarchy, in the same silk that would decide, by its murmur, whether Eleanor was a countess or a criminal. The dowager had buried this scandal once with money and silence. She meant to bury it a second time with laughter, in front of everyone, where the burial could not be quietly dug up again. Eleanor had not meant to go to the ball. She had no gown for it, and no invitation, and no wish to stand among people who called her deluded to her face, and worse, behind her back. It was the Marquess who told her she must go. He came to her in the parlor the morning the news of the forgery charge broke, and he laid it out without softening it because softening was not in him. "They mean to break you in public," he said, "where the breaking will be witnessed and remembered, so that even when the courts clear you, the room will remember you as the fraud. If you stay away, you concede the room. You must be there. You must stand in it." He paused, and then he said the thing that cost him, "And I will stand near you." A gown was found. The innkeeper's wife had a sister who had been a lady's maid, and who let down and made over a gown of gray silk, plain by the standards of the ballroom, but clean and well cut, and the color of a winter sky, and when Eleanor came down the end stairs in it, the Marquis, waiting at the bottom, went still in the particular way she had learned, meant he was feeling something he would not name. She carried no jewels. She carried in a small reticule the miniature of her father, because she would not leave it behind in an empty room, and because she wanted him there, in whatever way the dead can be present. The assembly rooms blazed with candlelight. Hundreds of them doubled in the long mirrors, and the orchestra played, and the diamonds caught the light, and the whole bright machinery of the county turned to look when Eleanor Hartley entered on no one's arm. The murmur began. At once, the deluded governess, the forger. Lady Marguerite stood near the head of the room in deep blue and old diamonds, and beside her stood a young woman in palest pink, a Miss Honoria Faulkner, the niece the dowager had long intended for Crispin, and who had been brought tonight as the picture of what a proper claimant to a great house ought to look like. All sought confidence and good blood, and a laugh that had never once been mistaken for grasping. The contrast was the dowager's design. The room was meant to look from the diamonds to the gray silk and conclude. Crispin Vane crossed to Eleanor before she had been in the room 10 minutes. He was smiling, and the smile had teeth in it now. He said, pitching it to Carrie, that he was astonished she had dared to come, given what was now known about the quality of her papers. He said the word forgery softly, and let it land. The deluded governess, he said, and now we may add the word forger. And the nearest dozen faces turned, and the murmur thickened, and Eleanor stood in the center of the turning room with her father's portrait, small and hidden in her hand, and felt the floor of her courage tilt. It was the lowest point. She had come 160 miles, and stood in 2 cold rooms, and let herself foolishly begin to hope. And now she watched the hope go to pieces in a blaze of candlelight in front of 3 counties. She could not produce the register here. She could not cross-examine a bought clergyman in a ballroom. She had only the truth, and the truth, in that moment, looked exactly like a lie wearing a made-over gown. Her eyes found the Marquis across the room, near the windows where he always stood, and she thought with a grief that surprised her that she had brought him into this, and that his silence had been worth a great deal, and that she was about to lose it for him along with everything else. And the Marquis of Aldous set down his glass. He crossed the room. He did not hurry. The crossing took perhaps 8 seconds, and the room measured every one of them, because a marquess crossing a ballroom toward a woman called a fraud is a sentence the county knew how to read. He stopped beside Eleanor. Close, closer. Then proprieties strictly allowed, and he turned to face the dowager and her niece, and the smiling cousin, and the orchestra faltered, and found its place and gave up, and the room went quiet enough to hear the candles. "I have examined the papers myself," the Marquess said. His voice was not raised. It did not need to be. "The marriage is real. The lady is the Countess of Wexcombe. I will stake my name on it, and I am staking it now." The room did not breathe. Lady Marguerite's fan, which had been moving, stopped. It was the first time Eleanor had seen the dowager motionless. Into that motionlessness the Marquess did one thing more, and it was the thing the county would speak of for a year. He turned to Eleanor and he offered her his hand, openly. The way a man offers his hand to the woman he means the world to know he has chosen, and he said her name. Not Miss Hartley, not the claimant. "Lady Wexcombe," he said, "will you allow me," and the giving of the title in his mouth, before 3 counties, was the proof no court could match. A bought clergyman could be weighed for months. A marquess staking his name in a public ballroom could not be unsaid. Eleanor put her hand in his. She had wanted, all her life, to be known, and she had thought the knowing would come from documents and decrees, from the slow machinery of the law. It came instead from a man's voice in a bright room saying her right name. Her hand was steady in his. Her eyes were not, but she let them not be, because there was no longer any reason to hide. The forgery charge did not survive the month. A sworn lie can weather a season of contempt, but it cannot weather the sudden interest of a marquis who has staked his name. And the marquis, having staked it, spent it freely. Bramwell was given the funds he had lacked, and with funds the slow machinery that had been built to starve Eleanor began instead to turn for her. He sent men to Yorkshire. He sent men to the village where the marriage had been made, and they returned with 2 surviving servants who had stood at the back of that country church 30 years before and remembered the day, an old coachman and a laundress gone grey, both of whom signed their plain names to plain accounts of what they had seen. The bought clergyman, faced with the prospect of being examined by men who could not be bribed, and a marquess who had announced before 3 counties that the marriage was real, lost his nerve entirely. He recanted in writing, confessed that he had been paid and frightened into his lie, named the hand that had paid him, and fled the county before the ink was dry. The diocesan court presented at last with the register that the late Earl's confessor had preserved against exactly this hour, with the letter in Catherine's own hand, with the 2 matched testimonies and the recantation laid beside the original charge, returned its finding before the first heavy snow. The marriage was valid. The issue was legitimate. The title of Wexcombe and the estate that came with it were Eleanor's by right, and had been from the hour of her birth. And the law, which had been built to exhaust her, now said her mother's name in its own dry voice. Lady Marguerite was not destroyed. The niche does not destroy such women, it corrects them. She was not turned out, for Eleanor would not turn out an old woman into the cold, whatever the old woman had done. Yet the hall she had ruled for 30 years was no longer hers to rule, and the family that had laughed at her direction grew quiet when she entered a room, because they had all been in the great hall on the first afternoon, and they all remembered who had laughed first and at what. And the memory did not sit well now that the woman in the mended glove sat at the head of the table. The dowager understood, in the way such people finally do, that her script had worked everywhere except here, and that the failure was permanent, and she carried the understanding with a stiffness that was its own quiet punishment. Once near the end of that first winter she said to Eleanor, with great difficulty, and no audience, that Catherine had been a gentle girl and had not deserved what was done to her. It was as near to an apology as 30 years of pride could come. Eleanor accepted it as such and said her mother's name back to her once plainly Catherine, so that the name might be spoken in that house by the woman who had helped erase it, and that, more than the decree, was the thing she had come for. If this story has stayed with you, perhaps you will let it stay a moment longer before you go, and tell someone the name of a woman the world tried not to know. Crispin Vane left the county. He had expected an earldom, and found himself a younger son, with no estate and a great deal of public memory of the afternoon he had shown a countess to the kitchen door, and the county is not kind to such men. Miss Honoria Faulkner, who had been brought to the ball as a picture, and discovered she had been used as one, married a baronet within the year, and was by all accounts the happier for being out from under the dowager's design. The boy in the too large coat, the only Vane who had not laughed, grew fond of the new countess, and was often at Wexcombe in the years that followed, and Eleanor, who had spent her life making other people's children better, found she had not lost the gift. She did not marry the Marquess that winter. She made him wait until the spring, partly because the courts wanted their decent interval, and partly because she had earned the right to be courted properly after a lifetime of being overlooked, and he who did not know how to court, learned. He learned to bring her music. He brought that first time a folio of pianoforte pieces, and when she asked why music, he was quiet a moment, and then said that there had been a portrait turned to the wall in his house for 8 years, and that he had turned it back, and that the room it hung in had a pianoforte in it that had been silent a long time, and that he thought the house was ready to hear music again. He did not say more than that. He did not need to. Eleanor understood that he had let the door open, and that the opening had cost him, and that he had done it because of her. They were married in the spring in the small parish church near Wexcombe, with the boy in attendance, and Bramwell weeping shamelessly in the second pew, and the dowager present, and silent, and for once, not in command of the room. It was not a grand wedding. Eleanor had wanted it small. The grand rooms had only ever been arenas to her. She had no wish to be married in one. It is winter again now, the second winter, and the great hall of Wexcombe Court is full again, but the fullness is a different kind. There is a fire in every grate. The cousins who remain have learned to call her Your Ladyship, and to mean it. In the long gallery, the portrait of the reckless, dark-haired Earl hangs in better light than it has known in 30 years. And beside it, newly hung, is a small portrait of a woman the family once paid to disappear. A gentle face with Eleanor's mouth, labeled in plain letters with her name. Catherine, Countess of Wexcombe. The dowager walks past it every day and does not look away. Eleanor stood that evening at the window of the morning room, with her husband's coat about her shoulders against the draught, watching the snow come down over the park her mother had never been permitted to see, and on the small table beside her where she kept it always lay the miniature of her father, no larger than a crown coin. Done wrapped now from its square of flannel, out in the open where anyone might see it. From the next room came the sound of the pianoforte, halting and bright, the boy at his lessons, and a slower passage beneath it where the Marquis sat near the fire and listened to a house that was no longer silent. Eleanor touched the small painted face on the table once, lightly, the way one touches a thing to be sure it is real. Make them know, her mother had said. She had made them know. And the snow fell on Wexcombe, and the fire held, and the music did not stop.